One of the most fundamental elements within the structure of a screenplay is the midpoint. It's a plot point halfway through the film that moves the protagonist closer to or further away from their goal. It's the moment in the story when the plot shifts, raising the stakes and sending the story's action off in a new direction. But while the midpoint marks a turning point within the structure of a screenplay, it also performs a vital function within the emotional fabric of the story. In this video, we're going to look at the midpoint and its role as one of the key story moments within a film. We'll use Alfonso Cuarón's space thriller Gravity, a beautifully structured film with a clearly defined emotional arc, to examine how the midpoint affects the protagonist's emotional journey. The midpoint performs an important function within a screenplay. It is at this point within the story that events bring a decisive change, perhaps a victory or defeat for the protagonist. It can take many forms, moving the protagonist closer to their goal or further away from it by changing the status quo and raising the stakes. In Gravity, the midpoint occurs shortly after Ryan Stone and her fellow astronaut Matt Kowalski reach the International Space Station, and Ryan becomes entangled in the escape pod's parachute. Matt detaches himself from the tether and drifts into space, sacrificing himself for Ryan's survival, which moves her closer to her goal of returning to Earth while simultaneously raising the stakes by leaving her without the support of her mentor. With her spacesuit out of oxygen, Matt communicates instructions to Ryan and she makes it aboard the space station. Ryan takes off her spacesuit, curls into a fetal position, and floats in the womb of the cabin. The image of Ryan floating weightlessly in the fetal position carries deep psychological resonance within us. Thinking about their writing process in the documentary It Began With a Story, Alfonso Cuarón and his son Jonas say of the midpoint in Gravity, "We knew that we were going to arrive at this moment of peace, where from that moment on the character would suffer an immense transformation. It is the first time that she is completely alone, and so we decided that it was going to be the beginning of that rebirth." The image of rebirth midway through the narrative is at the heart of what this film is about. Ryan is being reborn before she begins her journey home. It's also a moment of respite, dividing the film into two halves. In one half, the film is about death. In the other half, it's about life. Sometimes the midpoint within a movie can be so striking that it feels like you're watching two different films. In Roberto Benigni's Life is Beautiful, there's a midpoint that completely changes the plot and creates two distinct halves. Set in Tuscany in 1939, it follows the story of bumbling waiter Guido. For the first half of the film, world politics are only a backdrop to the main event, which is Guido's comic attempts to woo a schoolteacher named Dora away from her fiancé. Up to this point, the film is a boy meets girl romantic comedy, a fairy tale in which Guido comes to town, falls in love with and wins the heart of an unhappy, unpretentious upper-class society girl. He is the comic version of the knight in shining armour rescuing his princess from an arranged society marriage. Midway through the story, the film takes an audacious turn. The lighter mood of the first half changes abruptly after Dora arrives home to find Guido and their son have been taken by the Nazis. They, along with countless others, are forced onto a train destined for a concentration camp. And it is at this point that the film morphs into a very different, very somber story. As well as providing one of the key plot points within the structure of a screenplay, the midpoint also performs an important creative function in shaping the protagonist's emotional journey. In his book, Movies That Move Us, Craig Batty makes a direct link between the plot of a film and the emotional development of its protagonist. He argues that a screenplay is composed of two narrative threads, the outer physical journey and the inner emotional journey of the protagonist, both of which develop in parallel across the unfolding narrative. It is at the midpoint of the screenplay that the audience may see a change of focus between the protagonist's physical want and their need for emotional transformation. Back to Gravity. In the case of Ryan, her transformation comes about as she is forced to grapple with her sense of living an empty, weightless existence. At first glance, Gravity appears to be structured around a suspense-filled ride in space with survival at its core. All the plot points drive Ryan through a series of increasingly terrifying and deadly events as she makes her way back to Earth. However, while the construction of the narrative privileges the action surrounding a catastrophic event that leaves Ryan marooned in orbit, The film is also a meditation on grief. It delves into the backstory and feelings of one character, a woman on her first mission into space, who's struggling to cope with her emotions following the death of a child. If we see the film as a metaphor for Ryan learning to deal with the tragic loss of her daughter, as a drama playing out against the combined backdrop of outer space and inner space, we can see how her emotional journey is driven by her need to let go. And all of this comes into being at the midpoint. One more example can be found in The Lives of Others. Set in East Germany in the 1980s, the story follows Gerd Wessler, a devoted Stasi agent and expert interrogator who's been given the job of gathering evidence against the famous playwright George Dreyman. Wessler sets up his surveillance station in the attic of Dreyman's apartment building and begins observing the playwright and his girlfriend. While he observes their day-to-day lives, he becomes drawn into their world. The film's midpoint develops subtly over a series of events that culminate in a seemingly innocuous scene. While listening into a conversation, Wessler learns that Dreyman's close friend has been driven to suicide after years of blacklisting by the state. Both playwright and agent are emotionally affected by the news. Later that evening, Wessler encounters a boy in an elevator who recognizes him as a Stasi agent. It is a brief scene with a character we have not seen before, in which Wessler acts contrary to our expectations. He steps back from his interrogation role and shows genuine compassion for the first time in a moment that completely reorients both the protagonist and the story's narrative arc. Talking about three-act structure, Danziger and Rush say in their book Alternative Scriptwriting, one of the most difficult challenges in writing a three-act, character-driven story is to devise plot points that not only feed into the action, but also articulate character development. This is particularly relevant when creating an effective midpoint, where the two narrative threads of the story, the external plot and the internal emotion, must work together symbiotically to bring about an authentic, tension-filled series of events that pivot the film's direction, leaving the audience wondering what could happen next. In Gravity, it is the moment where Ryan must face up to her inner demons and learn to let go of the inner grief and guilt in order to survive the rest of the journey home. In Life is Beautiful, it is the moment where Dora sacrifices herself and voluntarily follows her husband and son, triggering a dramatic shift in tone as the comedy moves shockingly, yet effortlessly, into the world of the death camps. In The Lives of Others, it is the moment in the elevator with the boy in which Wessler begins to question what he stands for and his loyalty to the state. The midpoint changes everything. It does not need to be big or dramatic, nor does it have to be restricted to a single scene or sequence. It can often take several minutes of screen time to tease out every scene and sequence and raise the stakes to dramatic perfection. An effective midpoint is more than just a way to heighten the audience's interest or raise the stakes. It is where the protagonist's inner journey really starts to come into its own, where they find themselves again and take the first steps towards embracing the emotional qualities that they need to complete their journey. Hey, this is John here from the Script Department. If you like this video, why not give us a like and share your own examples of what you think makes for a great midpoint in cinema. And if you want to get more great screenwriting content like this, subscribe to our channel and check out our collection of podcast shows from our global network of writers. Just search for the Script Department wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.